Three goods. Bunch of no answers. Anybody ring this weekend? It's really annoying class. Play with it all the time. You're just staring at it. You just look, oh, it's so beautiful. Congratulations, good family weekend? Go okay? Long. It's a terrible long weekend. Okay, all right, good. How are we doing as a whole?
Pretty ground down towards the end.
Yeah, everybody's struggling to hang on?
Yeah.
Ready to be done with the semester? Okay, I understand. So a couple things to go through. I don't mind, I really don't mind pausing what we're trying to do in class if there's something you guys want to talk about, which is what's happened the last couple weeks. So that's a good thing. So I just want to finish where we left off, and then we'll shift into something different. Okay. So all of a week ago, do you remember what the title of this presentation was?
Was it one of the ones where like everyone's awful?
Nope. Nobody? Not a single soul?
Leadership.
Perfect. Nope. Okay. It's called The Secret of Life. What were we really talking about last week? It's one word, God. One word is all I need from him. What?
Steroid supplements?
Huh? Steroids?
Different class.
What were we talking about last week?
Courage?
Kind of. No. Starts with a C. Complaining. Typically.
Complacency? Consistency?
Just say it loud and proud.
Change?
Change. Oh my God. Okay. All right. Does practice make perfect?
Makes permanent.
Bingo. If you practice something wrong, okay, does he feel good about himself now? If you practice something wrong, right, you're going to perform wrong. You don't necessarily get it right, okay? But practice makes permanent, so how you practice, how you perform. Then why do we practice?
That way the first time you have to, like, you're more comfortable with doing something.
Okay, I'll take it. Why else? Why do we practice?
In the hopes of getting better.
In the hopes of getting, improvement, right? Who plays golf? Frustrating sport, right? Okay. Why do we practice? Why do we play? Why do you go to the driving range, James?
Try and get better. Try to beat my brother.
To try to get to what?
Beat my brother.
Perfect. All right, we have a true ulterior motive. Okay, it's simple competition. Fair enough. All right. If we go to the range and our swing's not very good, all right, it may take a while to improve, and then we go on the course and hopefully we play okay, right? Good. So, what is the difference between practicing something and competing? What's the difference?
There's other people there.
There's other people there. Okay, good.
Typically in a competition you get one try.
Okay, I'll take it.
Pressure.
Pressure, what do you mean?
Like it's pressure to perform. If you're practicing, it's like okay, it's all right if I mess up, I can just do it again. But if you're competition,
Will there be another competition?
possibly, but not another time to necessarily do it within the competition.
Okay, fair enough. So each competition is individual. Okay, is that different than practice? How?
There's that if you fail during practice, like as I said, if you fail during practice, you can try and succeed again.
Okay.
But if you fail during that singular competition,
But what about the next competition?
sure. Yeah, I mean, if you
Try again, right?
Yeah.
Is there much of a difference between practice and competition? Why?
Well, also the next competition and repeat. So
Fair enough, but neither's the next practice. Neither's the next repetition.
attitude.
Right. Huh?
Attitude towards. I mean, if it's practice.
What do you mean?
I mean, if it's practice, it's the same mentality. You think, oh no, blah blah blah. Well, competition, you're like, I must do well, kill.
Okay.
You treat every practice like it is competition. And your practice can be more worthwhile.
You should, yes. Agreed. Yes. Wes?
Like when I was in high school, like I wrestled, and our practices, we practice like 3 hours a day. But you go to competition, you're on that mat for no more than 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so
So duration?
duration, but in a way of like when you're in practice, you're gonna run the drill you're gonna pick your partner, run the drill 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
But and then you can do it over and over and over again. But it really
until you go to the next competition, right?
But each competition, especially like take the NFL, right? So each football game, yes, you're gonna have the next one, but it matters for your record and for like if you go to the playoffs, if you go to the Super Bowl.
Sure.
Each game should be treated individually.
Mhm.
Because each game matters just as much as the next one.
Okay. Or two.
Competition in a way should be the end result of all your practice.
Should be, but again, so what's the difference? Thomas?
So there isn't much of a difference, it's just you're in practice, you're competing against yourself, and then competition, you're competing against someone else.
The only real difference between practice and competition is the public. Did others see it? And how did it go? There's almost no real difference. Okay? Yeah, there's maybe one shot or one competition, and it matters, but so do those practices. Each practice matters for that competition. I would argue there's no real difference. Because there's what I call popcorn players, right? When the lights come on and the popcorn starts popping, it's like, okay, it's time to get up for the competition. It's time to perform. But if you didn't put in the work at practice, right? If you didn't try over and over, if you didn't try to master the move, okay, and give it your best effort, then you're not going to perform at an optimal level when it comes time to game time. In my opinion, there's not much of a difference. So, how does this apply to work? Everybody's favorite boss, Michael Scott. When you go to work, okay, who's had a bad boss? Bad leader? Most of us, right? We typically learn more from them. It's because people will rise to the level of their own incompetence. What that means is eventually you'll get promoted to something beyond your capabilities. So we have to practice. That's why we practice, right? This isn't the end of the world, but it's how you handle it, right? Does anyone have any interest in going in sales? Okay. You know, so, no. God, no. Okay. You know who's usually the sales manager? Somebody who was good at sales, right? Does that mean they're a good manager? No. It means they were good at sales. So sometimes you'll get promoted beyond your capabilities. Same thing for people you work with. All right. How you practice is how you perform, and that plays out in the workforce. All right. If you give it minimal effort, or 60% or 70% or whatever, and you think you're entitled to be the boss, you're probably not. If you give it that 100% effort and get rewarded, you're still hopefully going to be challenged. Okay? So how you handle it matters. So how do we get there? George Washington. What do we know about Washington? Quick history lesson. What do we know about George?
6'4".
Tall. Okay, what else? Anything else? Ethan? Lived the Continental Army against the British. Good.
He wasn't the greatest tactician, but he was a good leader.
Okay, I'll take it. Yep.
It is like guys not like him, but they respect him.
Eventually, yeah, because he screwed up. He was a big, tall, arrogant jerk, pretty much. Okay.
First president.
First president. It takes us a while to get to that. Partita?
He's good at parties.
Good in parties. That's right. Okay, remember we talked about that? So George is hanging out with the okay, here's George. George's dad dies when he's relatively young. He has older brothers, so the family basically runs out of money. To buy your commission, which is how you got commission back in the day, you bought your commission. Pretty sweet, right? No OCS or anything. Just, here, I'm an officer. Okay? So that's how you became a leader in the British Army, and he couldn't afford it. That's why I switched sides. English heritage, okay, as did a lot of early Americans. Switch side because he couldn't afford his commission, all right? First opportunity to be a leader, young lieutenant, okay? Take some Native Americans with him. They're on an expedition. They have to go somewhere and do something, okay? On the way, the Native Americans, they come across some French diplomats, all right? And one of the Native American dudes had the intent, Washington didn't know this, to kill the French guy. Kill the French diplomat. Took an axe to the head, killed him. One of our only allies at the time was France. Washington screwed up royally at his first opportunity to lead and became what, Declan?
First president.
The first president of the United States. Okay? Hung out with the founding fathers, was not well educated. They all were, okay? But he was tall and good looking, so he played well at parties. Ben Franklin, not tall, not good looking, creepy dude. Okay? Still did okay with the ladies. Weird guy if you get into Franklin, okay? So Washington, who leader of the Continental Army, defeated the British, first president of the United States, screwed up horribly as his first opportunity to lead. Ulysses S. Grant. What do we know about Grant?
Alcoholic.
This is the first thing people say every time about Grant. Here's what we think we know about his alcoholism. He drank when he was bored. Sound familiar? Good. Okay, what else do we know about Grant? Anything? What do you got? Led the Union Army, okay? How many times?
Twice.
Multiples, because he kept getting fired. Okay, what else do we know about Grant?
He beat
Beat Lee, okay? Where'd they go to school?
Wasn't educated.
No, he's a West Point graduate. With Lee. Robert E. Lee was apparently the perfect cadet. Never had a demerit. Okay, Grant, screw up. Bare minimum, total bag. Okay? Which one won the Civil War? Grant. Okay, Grant goes in the Army, right? Goes to West Point, not a great cadet, gets through, goes to the Army, gets out because he wants to make money. I'm going to go do some other things. Fails miserably in the private sector. Okay, not good at it, all right? Goes back into the Army, all right? Civil War breaks out, yay, good for him. Wins a couple battles, moves up, gets promoted. Put in charge of the Union Army, gets fired for losing battles. Put someone else in charge, doesn't go that well. Rehire Grant. I think it happened 3 times. Okay, Grant gets put back in charge. Okay, and keeps having to go. Robert E. Lee, the perfect cadet, right? Who we asked to lead the Union Army, who swore to defend the Constitution of the United States, at the first sign of trouble turned his back on his nation because his state seceded. Chose to lead the South, okay, and lead the Union, and lost the war. Okay, you know what the S stands for in Ulysses S. Grant?
Middle name.
Doesn't have one. When he registered at West Point, they misheard him, and so S was put as his middle name. He doesn't have a middle name. And it became Ulysses S. Grant, and then president. Okay? It's probably the only thing you'll remember today. So Grant screwed up plenty, all right, and still became extremely successful, and maybe led the most corrupt presidency of our all time. Okay? Meriwether Lewis. Who's Lewis?
Lewis and Clark.
Lewis and Clark. What do we know about Lewis and Clark?
Expedition to the West Coast.
Expedition to the West Coast. Okay, Meriwether Lewis and Lewis and Clark were internationally known, famous household names, okay, around the world for the expedition out to the West Coast. Okay, Meriwether Lewis killed himself alone in a cabin in the woods because he did not feel like he capitalized on his success. Clark became a senator, I believe, right? And Lewis felt like he failed. Even though he had all these people that would have gladly helped him because of who he was, he threw in the towel and just quit. Don't do that, please. Right? Don't do that. Call me, you can sleep on my couch. Adolf Hitler. Is Hitler a good leader?
Yes. You got a crowd going. He's charismatic.
Was he a good leader?
No.
Why not?
You don't succeed through fear tactics.
Okay, fear tactics, what else? Who said yes? You said yes right away. Why?
He was able to have everyone turn towards a common cause, though not ethical.
Okay, so I specifically said, was he a good leader? Was he a good leader? Huh?
I thought, oh, you mean morally good?
I-
Quality of leadership or?
Good. However you want to take it.
He's charismatic, but he doesn't have a moral compass.
So,
So no, so he's a bad leader. Ethics are important.
Most cult leaders. He got people to believe that they were working towards something, and then we had enough people bought into his idea. He revealed he was actually working towards
Hold
it.
on.
They were already too far into it to get out, because then they realized they were going to be punished if they didn't. So
okay. What'd you have going? What we got?
We were
We're
talking
hung
about.
up on effective versus good.
Was he effective?
Yes.
In general,
Do you know?
How did it end for him?
not well.
In a
but
ditch covered on fire with a bullet in his skull.
That doesn't mean you're not effective.
Was he effective? Did he win an election?
Yes.
Not once.
No.
Mobilized a small country against the entire world.
and
Right,
he
and
only
how
lost
did it
the
end?
last one
He
joined.
didn't end well. That's not the point, though.
That, why is it not the point?
What was he able to do with the forces that he had? He was able to do a lot.
Yeah,
And he totally blew it.
he was
able
His
to fight
ego
like
was
7.
so massive that as they were advancing with Blitzkrieg, which worked phenomenally well, he pulled them back because his generals were advancing without his authority. Was he effective?
Makes sense.
Yes or no?
I mean, I would put more furnace on Japan for blowing up Pearl Harbor on them losing the war.
Separate from Adolf. Separate from Adolf. Okay?
I'd say his biggest mistake was attacking Russia with
Which is a ineffective. He made terrible choices and split his fronts 3 different ways when he did that.
Yeah, but if you make one bad decision, that doesn't define your whole leadership.
Correct. How many bad decisions did he make? A shitload. Did he also mass murder people?
Yeah.
Was he good? Was he effective?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Lost horribly. Was he effective at certain things? Sure. Good speaker. Mobilized a few people who came out of a depression. Right? Wrote a book. While in prison. Was not terribly effective. Was a terrible tactician. Okay? Blew it 6 different ways from Sunday. Had everything going his way. Completely screwed it up. All right? Love to bring up Hitler because normally everybody says yes. Okay? If you get into it, not at all.
How does he have everything going his way if he's a horrible leader?
Because he blew it. Because he had the advantage and he messed it up.
He
Right?
had everything going his way. He manipulated the majority of Europe into getting fooled by his tactics, and then he fumbled back at the end. That doesn't mean that he's ineffective overall. I would disagree with that.
Overall, he was extremely ineffective. He lost.
I would say the success of Germany more rode on the failure of the Western powers than it was on the success of Europe.
In Europe alone, we were not going to get into the war. We were coming out of a depression, which we weren't out of. Things were going horribly. We were not going to get involved in another war that had nothing to do with us. Okay? Europe was dealing with it on their own. Everybody gave up except for England, which had a distinct advantage of geographic location. All right?
I mean, they were also part of the reason that the majority of Europe was unaware. Wasn't their prime minister fooled by Adolf Hitler?
Yeah, because Hitler lied to him. Yeah, he said he was going to be peaceful and he wasn't. Okay? He was completely dishonest.
Wouldn't you say that that was an effective tactic, manipulating one of the leaders of Europe, and then
It was ineffective because he lost and he was dishonest.
I think we're focusing on the result. That was like the actual, which is like all.
But the result is from all of the decisions that he made along the way, which were not good. Had he stopped with the Rhineland, he would have had it. They would have given it to him. But because he kept going, it ended horribly. Because he made poor decisions, because he didn't know how to lead his army, right? And Luftwaffe, it went poorly, right? And it kept going poorly. In addition to giving a whole lot of drugs and no food to soldiers. Okay. It was going to end badly whether we got involved or not, more than likely. We can talk about it more, but I don't want to waste time. But the point is you have to look at the holistic person. Right? One more. You might know who Tom Anderson is? Remember your SATs? One of these things is not like the other. Okay. Anybody have MySpace? No? Nobody? God, you're too damn young. Okay, MySpace, precursor to Facebook, all right? One of the most popular social media sites before Facebook came along. There were others. MySpace was huge, right? And then everybody went to Facebook. And then actually there was a brief shift back to MySpace for a little while. You know why? For Facebook, you used to have a .edu email, right? So it was primarily college students. And when they opened it up to everybody, right, everybody jumps on Facebook. And college students were like, I don't want to be on here if mom and dad and grandma and grandpa are on here. And it was actually a brief shift back to MySpace for a little while, okay, for high school and college students, right? Then they took over, right? And everybody made fun of MySpace. You blew it. You guys were big, you were a monster, and you failed miserably. Tom sold MySpace. You may know for how much? This was after it was declared a failure. You know how much he sold it for? Over $500 million. Tom doesn't work anymore. He's a photographer, travels the world, okay? How does this fit in? Practice and competition. You're going to screw up sometimes. You might lose. The team might lose and you had a good game. You might have a great game, right? And it goes well, right? Excuse me. The team might win and you do poorly. You might do great and the team loses. It's all a part of it. But it's how you respond to the next opportunity. That we try again, that we go back to the driving range. We lose to our brother by 10 strokes. Makes us mad, right? We go back to the driving range and we keep working on it. Same thing in leadership. If you fail, don't give up. There is another opportunity. Right? Try again the next time. Right? And how the outside world perceives it is not necessarily accurate. Right? Everybody lambasted Tom Anderson as a failure. I think Tom feels pretty okay about himself. That'd be my guess.
Okay, I'm sorry, but would you say, I'm sorry for doing this, but would you say Tom was an ineffective leader?
How so?
Like, it's just a question, like, just in general to you. Like, would you say Tom was a bad leader?
I would say Tom was extremely successful despite what other people said about him.
But would you say he was a bad leader? Like, just in general.
I don't know.
Because, okay, well, I just asked that question because in the end, he lost to a competitor.
Well, he sold his business for
Because,
a ton of profit.
but would he have sold his business if it was still as successful?
So he could have sold it for more, right? Probably a year or two before he sold it. He probably could have sold it for $800 million.
Yeah, I'm just, yeah.
No, it's fine. What?
No, I was just saying, I was just trying to, like, make a,
None of them were great, Dylan.
I know.
None of them. They all have errors and screw up. Every single one of them. Doesn't necessarily mean they're a failure as a whole. Right? So it's how you perceive. This is the difference between competition and practice. It's just outside opinion. Does anybody see you practice? No. Nobody sees practice. They see how you perform in the game. They see how you perform at work. See how you perform on the quad. That's where you can get evaluated, right? But if you know that you did your best effort and you tried and maybe it didn't go well, that you can try and try again. Okay? But don't lose the lesson, good or bad. Every one of them had faults and problems. Right? But you have to look at the whole person collectively. Right? The funny thing about you cadets in general, and I noticed in history, James proved the point. When I bring up people from history, I don't know if we're not learning it, we don't remember it, we don't care unless we're history majors, right? Is we seem to only remember the worst thing about them. And I don't know why that is. Well, I know a little bit why, but that seems to be what cadets bring up, right? Whenever I bring up somebody from history, they remember the absolute worst thing about them, typically, which is very strange to me. Okay, we're going to shift gears. That was good. If you want to talk more, we can, but I want to show you this for a reason, and we'll talk about it briefly. So this is a few minutes long, so we're going to be tight on time, but please take notes if there's something you want to talk about, because we're going to talk about it afterwards. Cool? And you can stop listening to me.
Many people face the news each morning with trepidation and dread. Every day we read of shootings, inequality, pollution, dictatorship, war, and the spread of nuclear weapons.
You see?
These are some of the reasons that 2016 was called the worst year ever. Until 2017 claimed that record, and left many people longing for earlier decades when the world seemed safer, cleaner, and more equal. But is this a sensible way to understand the human condition in the 21st century? As Franklin Pierce Adams pointed out, nothing is more responsible for the good old days than a bad memory. You can always fool yourself into seeing a decline if you compare leading headlines of the present with rose-tinted images of the past. What does the trajectory of the world look like when we measure well-being over time using a constant yardstick. Let's compare the most recent data on the present with the same measures 30 years ago. Last year, Americans killed each other at a rate of 5.3 per 100,000, had 7% of their citizens in poverty, and emitted 21 million tons of particulate matter and 4 million tons of sulfur dioxide. But 30 years ago, the homicide rate was 8.5 per 100,000, poverty rate was 12%, and we emitted 35 million tons of particulate matter and 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide. What about the world as a whole? Last year, the world had 12 ongoing wars, 60 autocracies, 10% of the world population in extreme poverty, and more than 10,000 nuclear weapons. But 30 years ago, there were 23 wars, 85 autocracies, 37% of the world population in extreme poverty, and more than 60,000 nuclear weapons. True, last year was a terrible year for terrorism in Western Europe, with 238 deaths. But 1988 was worse, with 440 deaths. What's going on? Was 1988 a particularly bad year? Or are these improvements a sign that the world, for all its troubles, gets better over time? Might we even invoke the admittedly old-fashioned notion of progress? To do so is to court a certain amount of derision, because I have found that intellectuals hate progress. And intellectuals who call themselves progressive really hate progress. Now, it's not that they hate the fruits of progress, mind you. Most academics and pundits would rather have their surgery with anesthesia than without it. It's the idea of progress that rankles the shattering class. If you believe that humans can improve their lot, I have been told, that means that you have a blind faith and a quasi-religious belief in the outmoded superstition and the false promise of the myth of the onward march of inexorable progress. You are a cheerleader for vulgar American can-doism, with the rah-rah spirit of boardroom ideology, Silicon Valley, and the Chamber of Commerce. You are a practitioner of witty history, a naive optimist, a Pollyanna, and of course a Pangloss, alluding to the Voltaire character who declared, "All is for the best in the best of all possible worlds." Well, Professor Pangloss, as it happens, was a pessimist. A true optimist believes there could be much better worlds than the one we have today. But all of this is irrelevant because the question of whether progress has taken place is not a matter of faith or having an optimistic temperament or seeing the glass as half full. It's a testable hypothesis. For all their differences, people largely agree on what goes into human well-being. Life, health, sustenance, prosperity, peace, freedom, safety, knowledge, leisure, happiness. All of these things can be measured. If they have improved over time, that, I submit, is progress. Let's go to the data. Beginning with the most precious thing of all, life. For most of human history, life expectancy at birth was around 30. Today, worldwide, it is more than 70, and in the developed parts of the world, more than 80. 250 years ago, in the richest countries of the world, a third of the children did not live to see their 5th birthday. Before the risk was brought down 100-fold, today that fate befalls less than 6% of children in the poorest countries of the world. Famine is one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and could bring devastation to any part of the world. Today, famine has been banished to the most remote and war-ravaged regions. 200 years ago, 90% of the world's population subsisted in extreme poverty. Today, fewer than 10% of people do. For most of human history, the powerful states and empires were pretty much always at war with each other, and peace was a mere interlude between wars. Today, they are never at war with each other. The last great power war pitted the United States against China 65 years ago. More recently, wars of all kinds have become fewer and less deadly. The annual rate of war has fallen from about 22 per 100,000 per year in the early 50s to 1.2 today. Democracy has suffered obvious setbacks in Venezuela, in Russia, in Turkey, and is threatened by the rise of authoritarian populism in Eastern Europe and the United States. Yet the world has never been more democratic than it has been in the past decade, with 2/3 of the world's people living in democracies. Homicide rates plunge whenever anarchy and the code of vendetta are replaced by the rule of law. It happened when feudal Europe was brought under the control of centralized kingdoms, so that today a Western European has 1/35th the chance of being murdered compared to his medieval ancestors. It happened again in colonial New England, in the American Wild West when the sheriffs moved to town, and in Mexico. Indeed, we've become safer in just about every way. Over the last century, we've become 96% less likely to be killed in a car crash, 88% less likely to be mowed down on the sidewalk, 99% less likely to die in a plane crash, 95% less likely to be killed on the job, 89% less likely to be killed by an act of God, such as a drought, flood, wildfire, storm, volcano, landslide, earthquake, or meteor strike, presumably not because God has become less angry with us, but because of improvements in the resilience of our infrastructure. And what about the quintessential act of God, the projectile hurled by Zeus himself? Yes, we are 97% less likely to be killed by a bolt of lightning. Before the 17th century, no more than 15% of Europeans could read or write. Europe and the United States achieved universal literacy by the middle of the 20th century, and the rest of the world is catching up. Today, more than 90% of the world's population under the age of 25 can read and write. In the 19th century, Westerners worked more than 60 hours per week. Today, they work fewer than 40. Thanks to the universal penetration of running water and electricity in the developed world, and the widespread adoption of washing machines, vacuum cleaners, refrigerators, dishwashers, stoves, and microwaves, the amount of our lives that we forfeit to housework has fallen from 60 hours a week to fewer than 15 hours a week. Do all these gains in health, wealth, safety, knowledge, and leisure make us any happier? The answer is yes. In 86% of the world's countries, happiness has increased in recent decades. Well, I hope to have convinced you that progress is not a matter of faith or optimism, but is a fact of human history. Indeed, the greatest fact in human history. And how has this fact been covered in the news? A tabulation of positive and negative emotion words in news stories has shown that during the decades in which humanity has gotten healthier, wealthier, wiser, safer, and happier, the New York Times has become increasingly morose, and the world's broadcasts, too, have gotten steadily glummer. Why don't people appreciate progress? Part of the answer comes from our cognitive psychology. We estimate risk using a mental shortcut called the availability heuristic. The easier it is to recall something from memory, the more probable we judge it to be. The other part of the answer comes from the nature of journalism. Captured in this satirical headline from The Onion, CNN holds morning meeting to decide what viewers should panic about for the rest of the day. News is about stuff that happens, not stuff that doesn't happen. You never see a journalist who says, I'm reporting live from a country that has been at peace for 40 years, or a city that has not been attacked by terrorists. Also, bad things can happen quickly, but good things aren't built in a day. The papers could have run the headline, 137,000 people escaped from extreme poverty yesterday, every day for the last 25 years. That's 1.25 billion people leaving poverty behind, but you never read about it. Also, the news capitalizes on our morbid interest in what can go wrong, captured in the programming policy. If it bleeds, it leads. Well, if you combine our cognitive biases with the nature of news, you can see why the world has been coming to an end for a very long time indeed. Let me address some questions about progress that no doubt have occurred to many of you. First, isn't it good to be pessimistic, to safeguard against complacency, to rake the muck, to speak truth to power? Well, not exactly. It's good to be accurate. Of course, we should be aware of suffering and danger wherever they occur, but we should also be aware of how they can be reduced, because there are dangers to indiscriminate pessimism. One of them is fatalism. If all our efforts at improving the world have been in vain, why throw good money after bad? The poor will always be with you. And since the world will end soon, if climate change doesn't kill us all, then runaway artificial intelligence will, a natural response is to enjoy life while we can. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. The other danger of thoughtless pessimism is radicalism. If our institutions are all failing and beyond hope for reform, a natural response is to seek to smash the machine, drain the swamp, burn the empire to the ground, on the hope that whatever rises out of the ashes is bound to be better than what we have now. Well, if there is such a thing as progress, what causes it? Progress is not some mystical force or dialectic lifting us ever higher. It's not a mysterious arc of history bending toward justice. It's the result of human efforts governed by an idea that we associate with the 18th century Enlightenment, namely that if we apply reason and science to enhance human well-being, we can gradually succeed. Is progress inevitable? Of course not. Progress does not mean that everything becomes better for everyone, everywhere, all the time. That would be a miracle. And progress is not a miracle, but problem solving. Problems are inevitable, and solutions create new problems which have to be solved in their turn. The unsolved problems facing the world today are gargantuan, including the risks of climate change and nuclear war. But we must see them as problems to be solved, not apocalypses in waiting, and aggressively pursue solutions like deep decarbonization for climate change and global zero for nuclear war. Finally, does the Enlightenment go against human nature? This is an acute question for me, because I'm a prominent advocate of the existence of human nature with all its shortcomings and perversities. In my book, The Blank Slate, I argued that the human prospect is more tragic than utopian, and that we are not stardust, we are not golden, and there's no way we're getting back to the garden. But my worldview has lightened up in the 15 years since The Blank Slate was published. My acquaintance with the statistics of human progress, starting with violence, but now encompassing every other aspect of our well-being, has fortified my belief that in understanding our tribulations and woes, human nature is the problem, but human nature, channeled by Enlightenment norms and institutions, is also the solution. Admittedly, it's not easy to replicate my own data-driven epiphany with humanity at large. Some intellectuals have responded with fury to my book Enlightenment Now, saying, first, how dare he claim that intellectuals hate progress? And second, how dare he claim that there has been progress? With others, the idea of progress just leaves them cold. Saving the lives of billions, eradicating disease, feeding the hungry, teaching kids to read, boring. At the same time, the most common response I've received from readers is gratitude. Gratitude for changing their view of the world from a numb and helpless fatalism to something more constructive, even heroic. I believe that the ideals of the Enlightenment can be cast as a stirring narrative, and I hope that people with greater artistic flair and rhetorical power than I can tell it better and spread it further. It goes something like this. We are born into a pitiless universe, facing steep odds against life-enabling order and in constant jeopardy of falling apart. We were shaped by a process that is ruthlessly competitive. We are made from crooked timber, vulnerable to illusions, self-centeredness, and at times astounding stupidity. Yet, human nature has also been blessed with resources that open a space for a kind of redemption. We are endowed with the power to combine ideas recursively, have thoughts about our thoughts. We have an instinct for language, allowing us to share the fruits of our ingenuity and experience. We are deepened with a capacity for sympathy, for pity, imagination, compassion, commiseration. These endowments have found ways to magnify their own power. The scope of language has been augmented by the written, printed, and electronic word. Our circle of sympathy has been expanded by history, journalism, and the narrative arts. And our puny rational faculties have been multiplied by the norms and institutions of reason, intellectual curiosity, open debate, skepticism of authority and dogma, and the burden of proof to verify ideas by confronting them against reality. As the spiral of recursive improvement gathers momentum, we eke out victories against the forces that grind us down, not least the darker parts of our own nature. We penetrate the mysteries of the cosmos, including life and mind. We live longer, suffer less, learn more, get smarter, and enjoy more small pleasures and rich experiences. Fewer of us are killed, assaulted, enslaved, exploited, or oppressed by the others. From a few oases, the territories with peace and prosperity are growing and could someday encompass the globe. Much suffering remains, and tremendous peril, but ideas on how to reduce them have been voiced, and an infinite number of others are yet to be conceived. We will never have a perfect world, and it would be dangerous to seek one. But there's no limit to the betterments we can attain if we continue to apply knowledge to enhance human flourishing. This heroic story is not just another myth. Myths are fictions, but this one is true. True to the best of our knowledge, which is the only truth we can have. As we learn more, we can show which parts of the story continue to be true and which ones false, as any of them might be, and any could become. And this story belongs not to any tribe, but to all of humanity, to any sentient creature with the power of reason and the urge to persist in its being. For it requires only the convictions that life is better than death, health is better than sickness, abundance is better than want, freedom is better than coercion, happiness is better than suffering, and knowledge is better than ignorance and superstition. Thank you.
Thoughts?
Interesting video. I mean, I would have liked to see it more of like a year-to-year comparison rather than like 3 decades apart.
That's what the graphs were.
Well, I mean, he compared like 300 years ago to now, and then like 30 years ago to now. I just think it would have been interesting to see like 2015 to 2016 to 2017 to 2018.
Yeah, the data's out there, but to his point is that the good progress takes longer.
Yeah.
Takes longer to show. And 30 years is a blink of an eye, to be honest. Year to year is minimal, minimal change. Yeah, think about the last 3 years. Went by like that, right? You mean senior tomorrow, and you're out of here. Some of you 5, 6 years, 12 years of education for Partita, Medley. Okay, it's gonna go by. Tomorrow you'll wake up and be 30. Terrifying, isn't it? Okay, so yeah, it goes quickly. All right, Josh.
I'd say I'd agree statistically, yes. It's we're living in better conditions, but I believe human society and culture is not improved. I think the ideas that we have.
Why is it not improved?
I think people have a lot more individualistic mindset nowadays than the past about caring about others and wellness.
Why do you think that? Hold on.
I'm starting to write this stuff.
And that's fine. That's what we're here for.
Really excited.
Okay, Caitlin?
I'd argue it's a lot better. Like if you've ever done any research into what culture was like 100 years ago, I mean people did not give two shits about someone that wasn't your family or wasn't going to get you money or get you promoted. And it's a rough generalization, but today I feel like we're a lot more aware of caring for other people or learning how to support other people, just because unfortunately our society has shifted to where I don't know, people's mental health is bad, yeah, and that's not disregarding that, but it's 100 years ago people just didn't care about that. If you were sad or whatever, you went to a mental institution because people didn't want to deal with you, versus nowadays we actually are learning to care more about our fellow man and build other people up rather than just, oh, you can't get me anywhere, I'm not really going to waste my time on you. But
Okay.
I mean, I kind of disagree.
I'm shocked. Why?
I mean, I feel like it extended more past family and more of like the community that you lived in.
It used to?
Yeah, I would say the communities were tighter back then and then it's mainly because they you weren't able to move around as much. So you would have, let's say your family would settle down in somewhere in Virginia, and then you would in this community of like 30, 40 people, and because you couldn't move across the country like to California or down to Texas
Sure.
without really extensive work and money on your side, because not that many people had that much money in general to be able to move. So you kind of were forced in like, you were in a community of people that were kind of like there, and then over generations, it's like their kids would grow up with the people's kids.
Who's from a small town? What happens to the small town family that gets labeled something?
Labeled something?
Like they're like the Cotters. They got the weird kid in their house. What happened? Huh?
It happened in my town. Like they got the hell out.
They left?
Yeah.
Okay, because they can't change the narrative. Right? So if you're in that small community and things are good, that's good and that's wonderful, and hopefully it is, right? Hopefully there is a sense of community. Two things of that. If you get labeled a certain way as you're the outcast, or we don't like you, or that's the kid with the gimpy leg, right, and we can't fix it because it's 120 years ago, right, then it was almost impossible to change that. So you might be outcast. Right, that doesn't mean it's good. But change that to Houston or New York.
Yeah, the
Or-
same thing still happens.
Correct, but it's the same sense of community, it's just a larger community, right? So people are still the same, no matter where you go. And then it changes for that community. Say it's an apartment complex that you live in, or the neighborhood that you live in, or the people that you work with. It's still generally the same thing, right? You look at the Corps, man. You don't even like other cadets, right?
But they're different and weird. They live upstairs.
Yeah, they are, but what about non-regs?
Oh, they're worse.
The worst, right? Yet we're all Aggies. And when we run into one of them because we're overseas and we're in Qatar and we see someone else with a ring, what do we think?
Abuse. I mean, hi.
Best friends, right? Okay. So it's all in the perspective of how you look at that community. As a whole, they're the same. The scale is simply different. Okay. Josh, you had your hand up. Did you lose it? Okay. Main reason I show you that is where you're at in the semester and how we're doing and try to get you to understand to hang in there. All right? How you view the media is how you view it. If you let them tell you it's terrible and it's bad and war and yeah, Russia, Ukraine, yeah, COVID. Compared to the plague, right? To how COVID went, significantly better. We recover faster. We solve problems quicker, right? I don't know the numbers, but the death rate in Ukraine is far lower than what it would have been in a war 50, 60 years ago, right? Because of response and help and aid and a global community. Things are getting better, but we don't normally see it that way. Sometimes it's just your buddy who looks out for you. Sometimes it's your hometown. Sometimes it's your college, your state, whatever it may be, right? But things are getting better. So hang in there, okay? It will be okay, but it is literally what you make it, right? So that's my pep talk, to hang in there, finish the semester strong, and come back in the fall and wear your boots. Okay? National championship, maybe. Got to figure out who our quarterback is. All right, I don't want to hold you over. Have a wonderful week.